first of all, how you felt about playing to the studio audience here tonight, because I don't think a television studio audience in this country is used to your kind of show, and you must be very sensitive to the atmosphere you get.
Well, it was divided on the humor part. Being a social commentator, it's the same problem I had when I first started off in show business. I had very little money, and I couldn't move all over the city of Chicago like I wanted to. So in the small area where I worked, I just briefed myself in on the social problems that existed there. And as I gained more money and was able to do more traveling, and was able to set up research, then you branch yourself out where you can quote with all the social problems that exist. I would have problems working in New York City as far as humor is concerned, and then leaving New York City, going to Chicago, Illinois, because the same thing that affect people in New York City, like they have a water shortage in New York City. We haven't got a water shortage in Chicago. So what could be very profound jokes in New York City could not be such profound jokes in Chicago, Illinois. Now you depend on national and international news. There are certain jokes, things that happen here, like the tremendous amount of prisoners that's escaping for the jails. Well, this has had such worldwide publicity, particularly in America, that I could do a bit on this. But you get so relaxed and you're so key to a local situation. In order to do a show and get the same response I would get into Chicago, I would have to come here and bring my researches.
Well, you obviously did some research, a fair amount of research on the British situation, but for the moment, could I move from the topical to the historical about you? In your autobiography, you said very early on that you never learned hate at home or shame. Now, you were brought up in a poverty-stricken district in St. Louis.
Yes.
Now, does that statement that you never learned hate or shame at home mean that at that stage you accepted the situation of the Negro as a second-class citizen and as a poor second-class citizen?
No, it's a nature situation that, for instance, you have two kids, and if I slapped you tonight and it didn't leave a scar, you're not going home and tell your wife and kids that I slapped you, because you have to be a man at home. Well, consequently, I had no father. My mother had to be a mother at home. So she could never come. You never come and tell your kids about people that's misusing you. But you have such a mental thing going about people that have called you nigger and people that have patted you on the rump just because you was a Negro, that the first time someone do something good to you, then you tend to come home and talk about the good white folks. So consequently, all Negroes heard, this was not unique with me, but every Negro, the only thing he'd ever heard was about the good white folks. So consequently, I was 14 years old before I first had my bitter experience with a white man. And consequently, I didn't think all white people was this way. I just figured he was this way. And so what have happened now, that I can't guarantee the world that my kids won't have hate, because a Negro gets hit in the civil rights movement, and my kids see this on television. White kids have a different attitude now. When my mother was working in the white people's kitchen, I'm sure that little white kid went and asked their parents, Mommy, how come Miss Lucille puts up for this? And the white woman would look and say, oh, she's happy. And you go in the kitchen, there my mother standing with a bandana tied around her head, humming a song. Mm-hmm. And so the kid believed this. But white kids look at television now and see the demonstrations and see the rides. White kids can't be told that Negroes are happy. I could never tell my kid that Negroes are happy. I had a very interesting thing happen to me with my second daughter. She's 5 now, but when she was 3, I said, Lynn, if you do that again, Daddy's going to spank your rump. And she literally shook her finger in my face and foamed at the mouth and said, before you hit me, you hit that Mississippi sheriff that hit Mommy in the stomach when she was pregnant, because you're supposed to be nonviolent. And so there's a tremendous difference. The kids in America today do not have the protection that we had, but it works in various ways. The mind is a funny thing. You don't have rides in the southern part of America, and there's a reason for this. If you had to go to America tonight and write down 100 of the top Negroes in America, 98% of them would be a product of the South. Now, how do you compensate for this when you've heard that the South had been so bad? The South have been honest. They've told me where I could go. They told me it didn't make it right, but they've been honest. And they made mistakes in being honest. They gave me a segregated school. And at the same time they gave me a segregated school, they gave me a segregated principal. The head of the school was a Negro. So at 5 years old in the South, I got to see a black man with authority. In New York City, we have 1.5 million Negroes in New York City, and we only have 5 Negro principals as head of the school. And we only got 4 of them within the last 2 years. So up north, a Negro never sees a Negro in authority. I went to a segregated hospital when I was 6, so consequently, I got to see a Negro brain surgeon. Up north, you very rarely get to see a Negro doctor, let alone a Negro brain surgeon. Not only did I see the Negro janitors, but I also got to see the Negroes who was administrating the hospital, too. So all of these things have tend to work on the mind. So that's why I say in my book that I was never taught hate. And this is why this problem could go for so long, because my parents hid it from me.
Now, the first time that you really broke out and got some kind of prestige for yourself, was it an athlete, was it not, when you were at high school?
Was that an athlete in high school?
And you talked at one point in your book about the difference between a Negro succeeding as an athlete, running as you were,
Yeah.
and a Negro succeeding with his wits as an entertainer, which you later became. There's a distinction, isn't there?
There's a tremendous distinction. In America, at the time that I broke through as an athlete, the Negro was so looked down on that an athlete could represent the whole race. This is why we had so much admiration for Joe Louis, because when Joe Louis won a fight, every Negro in America won that fight, and white folks treated us a little bit different the next day. If a Negro stuck up a bank, every Negro in America stuck up a bank. And it's very frightening to know that today, if I stuck up a bank in Chicago, I become the Negro criminal. If I came to London and stuck up a bank, I become the American criminal. And this is very frightening and very insulting, that when I get on a plane, I hate to leave my country, because I'm 34 years old and I've been out of America 5 times. And the only time I've been forced to write the word American is when I come here to London, because you don't ask on the slip that I fill out race or color. You ask nationality. And the first time I had to write the word American when I came here to London, I almost had to think how to spell it, because in 33 years I never needed to write this word, American. So you have all of these tremendous hang-ups. At the point that an athlete, it goes back to the gladiator days, that the gladiator go in and if he killed the lion, the Romans would love him, but they didn't like the rest of the people. They just loved him because he killed the lion. And any time a group of people can be rated by their boxer, and this is the beautiful thing about London. I haven't been anyplace else, but they love Cassius Clay. They love him as a fighter, and I assume they would have loved him if he was a white cat. But in America, the Negroes have to love him because he represents the race. They have to be insulted when he says something that we think a hero shouldn't say. But since when did a boxer become the head spokesman for a whole race of people? No other place do this happen. You have Bertrand Russell here. You have great philosophers and great music writers, and these are the people that's respected.
None of them can box, as far as
None of them can box, but none of them need to box.
Yeah.
And when you look at the crop of the type of people that comes through all over the world as boxers, they've never been the top flight people that could represent a country or a race of people. Cassius Clay is the only man that's ever came through that was a clean man. He's the only man I know in the history of the world that got a divorce from his wife because the dresses was too short. This tend to frighten a lot of people.
When you decided to plump for not being an athlete but being an entertainer, and that was to be your career, you did a lot of study and a lot of research about humor, didn't you? And you read a lot about the subject.
Yes.
What guiding principles did you finally determine?
Well, one, I quit school 2 hours short of graduation when I was in college. My mother wanted me to be a doctor from the time I was 7 years old. Well, when I was 8, I realized I was very brilliant, and I realized I could be anything I wanted to be. And I realized that a Negro doctor can marry the type of woman he wants to marry. He can get respect in the Negro neighborhood. And so I very much wanted to be a doctor. When I got ready to enter college, it dawned on me that none of the wealthy people in America had ever sent their kids to med school. The Kennedys had never had a doctor in their family. The Rockefellers had never had a doctor in their family. The DuPonts had never had a doctor in their family. So consequently, I realized that this must not be it. I wanted to be the top. And so I found out what the rich white people sent their kids to school to study. They either studied law or they studied business administration. So being that I had so many points against me, I studied both of them. I went to school and majored in business law. When I was about to graduate, I took a 2-hour French course, which I flunked, and I had straight A's on my transcript. And I knew I could pass it if I wanted to, but when I flunked it, it was a turning point in my life, and I think this is the cause of me being in show business. When I flunked French, I realized that dogs in France understand French. I realized that dogs in Russia understand Russian. And then I realized that you're born through nature with all the wisdom you need to get human dignity. And I was really going to school to get human dignity, and I found out at a very early age I couldn't buy it. I couldn't educate myself upon it. And then I learned other things later, that if you can imagine how many millions of people would be dead today on the face of the earth if it weren't for blood plasma. An American Negro by the name of Charlie Drew invented blood plasma, and he bled to death in an Atlanta, Georgia hospital waiting room after an accident because they didn't accept Negroes. And so I was very lucky that I learned at a very early age that you can't educate yourself upon human dignity.
So why did you split off into show business?
Well, after I quit college, I had to learn people. And I went to Chicago, and I got various jobs to learn people. Being a very highly educated man, I wanted to get a job on the docks loading Campbell's soup. But I was very tickled that I knew how to get the job, because the Negro that goes in and talk right and dress right, they would never give him a job loading the docks. So I went into the employment office and I pretended that I couldn't read or write, knowing that that system would hire me, because this is the type of Negro they're looking for, with a strong back and a weak mind. And then I started learning people, and I would shift from one job to another. I faked out like I was an engineer one time, knowing that the federal government was under pressure with government contracts, that if you don't hire Negroes, you can't get a contract. And I knew they needed a Negro engineer, so I went and said I was an engineer, that I had graduated, and knew they needed a Negro so bad they would never check my record. And knowing that once I got hired, the white engineers would think that I was such a brilliant engineer being hired as a Negro, they would never question my work. So anytime something happened, I would check their work, because they wouldn't want their work to go in and be embarrassed by mine. I would check their work, and what they put down, I would put down. And then one day in 1958, I went into a nightclub. Well, after being an athlete, and this is a sad commentator about athletes, you become somebody, and you're really not. You win a race, and you can't sell one of your medals for a bowl of beans. But when you are oppressed, this tends to lead you, and you look forward to every Saturday, the crowd cheering you. You look forward to them making you a human being, instead of really being what you know society have made you. And after I quit running, I wanted that clap. I wanted to hear. I wanted to be in the center of attention. I heard a comedian one day, and this is when I decided it's the closest thing I could get to get the Saturday night cheers. It'll be better, because every night in the week I can get it. And this is when I decided to go into show business, knowing that anything I wanted to do, I could do. I sit down and I studied people. I knew when to break in new jokes. In America, the payday is every 2 weeks, the 1st and the 15th. So I knew in order to break in new lines, I'd have to do it on the 1st and the 15th, when the biggest part of the audience was happy because they got their pay in their pocket. So knowing that I would dare break in a line in between those 2 days, then you start learning people, and you start learning the social thing. You start learning what makes people laugh. And from there, I developed such a social awareness. And then the Congo situation broke open. And that's the Congo breaking in '59 is the cause of Dick Gregory being where he is.
Well, why do you think you get away with the kind of line that you put across in nightclubs, the kind of jokes that you make about racism and about the color problem? Is it because you're playing on some kind of guilt feeling in your audience?
No. I've had many whites ask me about a guilt feeling. They say, do you feel that the white man laughs at you because he's guilty? It might be true, but only a white man could answer that, because if you were sitting in my audience and you laughing like hell, I have no proof that you're not a light-complected Negro. That's not guilty at all.
But you're working on something. You must be tapping something.
I work on one thing of honesty, and I'm aware socially enough to know that basically man through nature is honest. In New York City, we have 10 million people. We only have 26,000 cops. So society tells me that basically everybody is honest, because if man was basically dishonest, you'd have to have 1 cop per man, and you couldn't assume that the cop was honest. And so 9 times out of 10, you get a small police department to quote with the very bare minimum of the people that's going to be dishonest. A dishonest man very seldom has a good job, very seldom can afford to pay to see me. So consequently, I know basically I'm dealing with an honest man. And although he might not like what I'm saying, he's read the same books that I've read. He's interpreted the world affairs as I have, and it's very hard to fight honesty. If you accuse me of taking your wallet, I can put up a big bluff and say I did not steal your money, but I can never hit you because basically you are honest. And when I go and get off to myself, I have to admit that you were right.
I was referring to nightclubs there a minute ago. I'd like to turn to a different kind of situation altogether, and that's a civil rights demonstration in the South. I think it was Birmingham. And in connection with this, you describe in your book how you were beaten up by one particular white man. And after he'd beaten you up, he slumped over the wheel of his car, crying, and he turned around and said, "What are you trying to do to me, to you?" What do you think he meant by this?
Well, what he meant by that was I did not go into Mississippi as a Negro. I went into Mississippi with part of the capitalistic system behind me. You see, I command $5,000 a week in America. And it's very frightening when I found out a country with 190 million people, that there's less than 5,000 people in America that makes $50,000 a year or more. So white people have respected me through a capitalistic system, not a democracy, but through a capitalistic system. The fact that with all of this money that I could make, I will still say, forget about this, let's work for human dignity. And he was having problems at home. When I marched in Mississippi, I had white people that came out and asked me for my autograph. Because in a capitalistic system, I was not a Negro, I was a millionaire. And when he go home at night, he had to answer questions to his wife. Here's a man that's probably not making enough money to live on. And I make all that I want. And so I ended up being the heavy and he ended up being the light. And when he slapped me as he was driving me to the police station, and I just held my hands up so he wouldn't hit me, he turned to me and he was crying. And he said, "What are you trying to do to me?" I don't think he would have asked any other Negro this. But this is the fallacies of a capitalistic system. The fact that a poor man can arrest a rich man for wrong. And at the same token, I know every time I go out and demonstrate that any time any policeman puts you in jail for right, the jail becomes the prisoner. Had I hit someone and knocked them down, just as John Doe, Negro, no one around the world would know it. But every time any ordinary Negro gets arrested, you know he was put in jail. This is the pressure the jail is under. And this is the social system.
Could I put a last question to you, which is about the way that the civil rights movement is going? And if, as seems likely, it's going to get hotter before it gets cooler, do you think it possible that a time will come when your kind of frank comment and humor about these problems will, for reasons of civil tension and even worse strife than there is now, become unacceptable?
No, what will happen, not unacceptable, but unpermittable, because now white America looks around and they see that this civil rights movement didn't want just a little bit. You see, they gave us what we wanted, not out of the goodness of their heart. We went out and we marched and we demonstrated, and we got a bill pushed through. But what the bill meant was, for 100 years, a man changed my dollar for 32 cents. Today, he's giving me 64 cents. And what black America is saying, we don't want 64 cents change for $1. We want a full dollar's change for $1, or this cash register won't ring no more. What we saying, if you don't change my dollar the same as you change white folks' dollar, we're going to act the same way. Now, America's not going to put up with this. And they're going to pass laws that's going to say that you can be arrested for inciting a riot, which means if Dick Gregory goes into a city and tell the truth, and a riot starts a year later, they can come back and put me in jail for inciting a riot. And what they're going to do is make that Constitution work different, because the Constitution gives Americans the right to demonstrate. And it's really not helping the demonstrators, helping America. Because as long as you can keep your demonstrations in the open, I can watch you and control you. But when you pass laws that tell me that I can be arrested for inciting a riot, then I'm going to have to go underground. And when I go underground, I'm going to have to watch my best friend. And if I see my best friend talking to you, and I might think that you're a government agent, and I might think he might have told you something I said, then I might have to kill him. And in the process of doing this, you see, when revolutions get to the point where more of the oppressed people are killed than the oppressor. In the Mau Mau uprising, it was only 10 white people killed. Thousands of Negroes were killed. But anytime the oppressor starts killing the oppressed people to get to the man who's oppressing him, they usually wake up. And I think this is the sad commentary that's going to happen in America. We're going to pass laws and make this beautiful civil rights movement. And I say beautiful because never in the history of the world have anyone ever done what the Negro in America is trying to do. And every white man in America should fall on his knees and thank us, because we're the first time a social revolution broke through where we're not saying we want to change the institution. We're saying, cut me in on my share. And I think he will pass laws of such that will make this black man say, okay, baby, let's change it. And when we get it, we're going to take it for ourselves.
Dick Gregory, thank you very much.
My pleasure.